right, who should control federal elections? If the states control them, they can strangle the federal government. And if the federal government controls the elections alone, then that could be an abuse of power. And in Federalist number 59, Alexander Hamilton's back in the chat, and he's going to argue that to survive, the federal government must have the power to protect its own elections, but not the power to manipulate them. And that's the balance that the Constitution creates. I'm Matt Haskell. I'm a high school civics and history teacher, and we're taking this journey through all 85 of the Federalist Papers, and we're going to talk about securing elections. We're going to welcome Alexander Hamilton back after his hiatus. So let's go ahead and set the stage. So the Anti-Federalists were worried that giving Congress any authority over federal elections would let national leaders rig the system. And Hamilton agrees that, you know what, that concern matters, but he insists that there's a more urgent danger. If states can shut down federal elections, they can kill the Union without ever firing a shot. And so the central government must have a way to keep the system alive. So Hamilton begins to frame his core argument, and he lays it out pretty clearly. Every government must have the means to preserve itself. And if the states, if the states alone controlled federal elections, they could do things like refuse to hold elections, or they could delay elections indefinitely. They could change the rules to weaken the federal government, or they could create chaos during different crises that arise. So in short, they could dismantle the Union from the outside. Now, Hamilton offers a simple example. What if one or two powerful states decide that they don't like the current federal policies? So they could stop choosing senators. They could refuse to run elections for representatives in the House. Or they could just simply forget to hold federal elections altogether. And then what? Well, the federal government collapses. Not by war, not by rebellion, but instead by non-cooperation. And so then Hamilton flips his argument and he begins to say, you know what, we're going to turn to the opposite fear. And that is, if Congress had exclusive control, no limits, Congress could do things like change election districts for its own advantage. It could set election days that favor certain voters. It could restrict participation. It could manipulate turnout. And Hamilton admits this openly. So the Constitution gives Congress limited authority, but not unlimited authority. And so the Constitution then, it creates a hybrid system where you have the states that control the basic structure of federal elections, like setting the districts, setting rules and logistics, or then Congress can step in only to ensure that elections actually happen, the time, the place, and the manner. Now, Hamilton says the states keep primary control because they are closest to the people, but the federal government acts as kind of a safety valve, and that is to prevent sabotage. So it's kind of like having a double safeguard. Now, why Congress's power is necessary then is Hamilton's going to go on to explain that without this federal authority, any single state could break the entire system, or that political factions could weaponize election rules. When you hear factions, we should probably just say political parties, when those things come up. But also, national security could crumble as a result here. And then finally, enemies could just exploit any type of internal division in the country. So in other words, no federal election equals no federal government. Congress needs enough power to keep the machinery running, but not enough to tilt the field in the favor of Congress. Now, there are some historical points that Hamilton's going to point towards. Some things like in some earlier confederacies, like if states withheld cooperation, the whole system fell apart. You got national institutions that collapsed because states refused to participate. And confederacies would prove to be fragile, especially whenever a local government controlled national mechanisms. And so these failures then, in the past, taught a lesson that a national government cannot depend on voluntary state cooperation. So, as we look to what Hamilton laid out in his chain of reasoning, he said first, every government must control its own survival. And that states, if states alone run federal elections, they could run the risk of destroying the Union. And then if Congress alone runs the elections, it could abuse the people. And so the solution then is shared authority. And Congress then is their limited power to act as as a safeguard, that's what it's there for, not as a weapon. Don't let that limited power become weaponized. And there's Federalist number 59 in 5 easy steps. Now, like we talked about with Madison in these last few, there's a general tone that exists in the essay. And Hamilton's tone is, he's writing like a man that's trying to reinforce like the foundation of a building while he's standing inside the building. So his firm is rather, or his tone is rather firm. It's rather logical. It's slightly alarmist, but it's also deeply aware of how fragile the republic could be. And he's not trying to defend political advantage. He's trying to defend its existence. And so with that, he goes on, you can look at Hamilton's moral arguments in this essay. And its point is rather subtle, that a republic cannot survive if one part controls everything, or if one part controls or can destroy everything. And so the balance then protects freedom, and shared responsibility, well, it protects legitimacy. So no one level of government should be able to do things like rig elections or refuse elections or end elections. And the Constitution then forces cooperation because liberty needs cooperation. And in our modern time, the debate that Hamilton raises, it does still exist because we have federal versus state authority questions. We have need for election oversight. Voting rights can be called into question. We see the issues with district maps and gerrymandering. Election security has, crept up in the last few elections. And then, of course, there's the question of what happens during national emergencies or the possible delay of elections. And every one of those arguments is about, federal elections, and that Hamilton has his fingerprints on those particular elections themselves. And he reminds us that, elections are the lifeblood of the Union, and someone must ensure that that blood keeps flowing. So our takeaways tonight are that, one, states run federal elections, but not exclusively. And two, Congress can act to protect elections, but not manipulate them. And then three, the federal government must have the power to secure its own survival. So I think it's safe to say that Federalist number 59 is Hamilton's warning that America cannot survive if the rules of federal elections can be weaponized by either level of government. The founders built a system where states manage elections, Congress safeguards elections, and the people get to judge both. And so a republic lives or dies by whether elections remain free, fair, and functioning. And Hamilton believed the Constitution gave us the tools to protect elections if we use them wisely. If this one helped you, if this episode helped you understand, the control behind federal elections, please, share it with others and stuff. I mean, I appreciate you guys taking this time to watch it and making it this far. But I'll be around, tomorrow's Tuesday, and I'll go ahead and lay out Federalist number 60. Hamilton's going to be back in this one, and this is where he addresses a new danger overall, and that is, can Congress manipulate elections for political gain? Thanks for taking the time to watch.